Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, the world waits and watches for a possible invasion of Ukraine and also a hopeful sign. This morning, the Russians report that some of their units are being pulled back. As Russia insists the door to diplomacy is still open, there is new U.S. intelligence that an invasion could come soon.
He continues to add to his readiness. He continues to give himself more options should he pursue a military path here. It is entirely possible that he could move with little to no warning.
Also this morning, the U.S. moving embassy staff out of Ukraine's capital. We have team coverage from Moscow to Washington. Dismissal, new developments in the legal battle between Sarah Palin and the New York Times. The surprise announcement by the judge during jury deliberations and why this may not be the end for the former VP candidate's defamation case. And finally, preserving paradise on this Black History Month will take you to a small town known as Black Eden for the renewed efforts to restore the place where many found reprieve from segregation. And it's nice to be back together again on Tuesday now.
Yes, after a little long weekend.
I know. Valentine's Day, Super Bowl, all kinds of stuff going on.
Exactly. I wouldn't have gotten up early very well yesterday. So.
Yeah, we said yesterday, this should be a holiday, and Joe's smart.
It's the least productive day of the year, they say.
All right, we begin this morning, though, in Ukraine, where fears of a Russian invasion remain high and hopes of averting a conflict hang in the balance.
In an address to his nation yesterday, Ukraine's President Zelensky suggested an attack could come tomorrow. Then his spokesperson later clarified that he was referring to what was already being reported in the media. Zelensky said Ukrainians should, quote, make it a day of unity. New satellite images show increased Russian military activity along the border with Ukraine. Despite the buildup, Moscow says it's still willing to give diplomacy a chance ahead of today's meeting between Russia's Vladimir Putin and Germany's chancellor. And just this morning, a slight glimmer of hope. Russia's defense ministry says it's pulling back some troops from the border. In Washington last night, President Biden spoke with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the phone. Both leaders agreed the window for diplomacy remained open, with the White House signaling its readiness to engage with Moscow.
It remains unclear which path Russia will choose to take, because we do not know. It is his decision to make. We remain engaged with Russian government in full coordination with our allies and partners. The path for diplomacy remains available if Russia chooses to engage again constructively.
Our team is standing by to bring you more on this story. We'll go to our senior White House correspondent, Kelly O'Donnell, in Washington in a moment with the latest on American diplomatic efforts. But we're going to start with NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and NBC News reporter Matt Bodner in Moscow. So, Aaron, I want to start with Russia saying it's going to pull back some of its forces from the border. What are Ukrainians making of this? Could this be the start of any de-escalation?
Hey, Joe. Well, the Ukrainian government is reacting skeptically to this latest announcement from the Kremlin, with the foreign minister, Ukrainian foreign minister, saying, we have a rule, don't believe what you hear, believe what you see. When we see a withdrawal, we will believe in a de-escalation. We also heard from the spokesperson for the Ukrainian president saying that they're taking these reports cautiously and that any troop movements can be quickly moved back. I was speaking to Ukraine's former defense minister, who's part of a think tank here in Kyiv, who's been analyzing the situation very closely. He says that he has seen a small amount of troops being moved. He said that it was not a big deal, although noting in his estimation he believes a risk of escalation for tomorrow is low, and that he remains concerned with the situation to the south, the Russian military exercises in the Black Sea that he says are blocking off large chunks of the sea. And that is a big deal in Ukraine, because 95% of the country's exports leave through ports to the south. So there's still some concern, plenty of concern here in Ukraine about the overall situation, Joe.
So, Matt, how is Russia explaining these troop movements? Should we read much into that decision?
Thank you, Joe. Well, it's interesting. So right after they announced this very kind of non-specific withdrawal, we started seeing a PR blitz. And we saw the foreign ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, say that today is the day that they destroyed Western media war hysteria without firing a shot. And frankly, if that's the worst thing that happens at the end of this, I'm okay with that. The fact is we continue to see evidence of a buildup. Just this morning we saw fresh satellite images of helicopters and attack aircraft well within striking position of Ukraine. There's more more ships heading into the Black Sea. So we're not yet seeing any evidence of a drawdown. And also, just 2 weeks ago, we heard a very similarly worded statement from the Russian Defense Ministry claiming almost exactly the same thing, that troops from 2 of the military districts that are involved were withdrawing. But in the satellite imagery, in social media, open source, we continue to see more troops coming. So it's really just too soon to say if this is real or not. We've seen this at least twice in the past 2 months. So it's just we just have to wait and see. A week from now, it might be clearer if this is real or not.
So in the wake of all this, Aaron, what is the mood like on the ground where you are among Ukrainians?
Well, Joe, it remains very much business as usual here in Kyiv. We were driving around the city this morning. We didn't see anything of note, no signs of panic. The supermarkets are all stocked, no long lines at the gas stations. People are going about their normal daily lives. Some have chosen to leave Kyiv. Some have evacuated. Some have sent their children to the western portion of the country, but for the most part, most people are staying here and watching the situation while also getting prepared in some cases. We know that the city is readying itself. They're looking at increasing the number of shelters here in the city. They're making sure that their water and power supplies are secured. But for the most part, there is calm, and that is seen, according to experts I've been seeing, talking to, as a good thing, that calm is a critical factor in all of this. The calmness of the Ukrainian people, coupled with the preparedness of the Ukrainian military for a potential attack, combined with this intense diplomatic pressure that is now underway, could be potentially critical deterrents for the Kremlin, Joe.
So, Matt, we heard from Russia's foreign minister yesterday saying Moscow is willing to keep up diplomatic efforts ahead of those talks with Germany's chancellor. We know Germany is heavily dependent on Russian gas. So how difficult could this be for the German leader? How is the Kremlin viewing this meeting?
It's an interesting question. So Scholz is obviously kind of the newest leader on the block in this regard, and this is going to be. He's also the last one in a long line of Western leaders that have kind of cycled through on phone calls and in-person visits. But he's also, as you mentioned, the gas dependency. Germany is among the most dependent on Russian gas, and also he's entering Moscow today on a very interesting day of messaging. As you mentioned, Lavrov saying that Russia's open for diplomacy. These apparent signals this morning that Russia might be willing to start to back some of those troops away. So in a sense, he's arriving in a very different situation than Macron did last week, for example. And we've heard from the Kremlin that these might be very long talks. So it is kind of this sense of maybe a last-ditch diplomatic effort. But again, it's all complicated by this very kind of drastic change in Kremlin messaging this morning. So we'll just have to see how it plays out today.
Matt and Aaron, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Let's now bring in NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell with the latest on the U.S. response to this crisis. Kelly, good morning. So U.S. officials have been warning an invasion could happen in a matter of days. There's this new intelligence. What's the latest on what they're saying about the timing?
Well, it remains tense, and there, of course, is great concern, and the White House will be watching very closely these reports of Russia maybe changing its posture along the border, as Matt was outlining. Too soon to tell on that. But part of what the White House is trying to say is there still is room for diplomacy if Vladimir Putin is willing to engage on that. And we're seeing some of that today with the German chancellor there, and with the expectation of a day full of talks with the German chancellor, who, of course, was just here at the White House a few days ago. And President Biden has been talking with and in close contact with his European partners, trying to have everyone on the same page and trying to, through each of the conversations they have been having, press the same message that there would be a very high cost to Russia if they go forward into Ukraine, and to try to say that there would be a united response, and it would be economic in nature, and it would be crippling for Russia. There could, of course, be consequences for Europe and the United States as well economically that would come from that. So they're trying to use whatever measures they can. Now, on the timing, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby talked about some of the intelligence that the U.S. has been watching and the concern that we're in a window now where there could be action from Russia at any point. Here's John Kirby.
Even over the last 24 to 48, over the course of the weekend, Mr. Putin has added military capability along that border with Ukraine and in Belarus. I won't get into a specific date. I don't think that would be smart. I would just tell you that it is entirely possible that he could move with little to no warning.
One of the questions has been, would Russia take any action during the time of the Olympics, which run through Sunday? And the U.S. has been consistently saying in the last few days that that is a possibility. And so that's part of why we've seen this heightened sense of caution and warning and the flurry of diplomatic activity, because they don't believe that the international sort of peaceful sporting event is any kind of protection against action from Russia if Vladimir Putin were to decide that it was the right time to move. Savannah, Joe?
And Kelly, one of these actions that we've seen taken, we mentioned at the top of the show, the U.S. temporarily closing its embassy in Kyiv, moving it to the western part of the country away from the Russian border. What does this move mean for the diplomatic staff still in Ukraine, those who are moving to the western part of the country, and any American citizens who are still in the country?
Well, the message for American citizens who are not part of the diplomatic corps is to leave Ukraine. The U.S. is saying there will not be an effort to send U.S. military into the country for any rescue mission if there is an armed conflict later. So they're saying leave now, and that there are NATO partners along the border where U.S. Citizens can get easy access to NATO countries where they would be safe. So that message has been going out for weeks, and it has been ramped up. Regarding the diplomats, they have drawn down significantly the number of working diplomats in the missions, the diplomatic missions in the different sites in Ukraine. So in the capital city of Kyiv, that was the main location. But intelligence has suggested that that could be an attack site, not the U.S. embassy per se, but the city itself. And so they have moved to the far western city of Lviv to try to give some distance and to have an operating place for American diplomatic personnel, a very small number, we're told, but to give them physical distance away from the Russian border.
And Kelly, before I let you go, let's talk about the potential paths to diplomacy that remain. So far, efforts by the U.S. and other countries, I mean, they really haven't gone anywhere. We've also really seen other countries take the lead on diplomatic conversations with the Kremlin. How is the U.S. working with its European allies at this point to keep a peaceful option on the table?
Well, President Biden would say he spoke to Putin directly this weekend, and so that he is engaged as well. Obviously, this is in Europe's backyard, and so part of what the U.S. position has been is that the European leaders have a great deal at stake here, and they have to have a large voice. But the U.S. has a sacred commitment, as the president will often say, through the NATO partnership to defend those European allies if there is aggression that extends beyond Ukraine to those NATO partners. So it is one of those things where on the surface we're not seeing any diplomatic breakthroughs. If there is any break that moves toward peace, that could be something that would happen with little notice, and one that all parties involved here are saying they are still hopeful could happen. Savannah, Joe?
All right. Kelly O'Donnell, thank you so much.
Now to an unexpected twist in Sarah Palin's defamation lawsuit against the New York Times. A federal judge announced yesterday he will be throwing out the former Alaska governor's case. He said the plaintiff, Palin, failed to meet the high standard of proof needed in a libel case. The judge says he will allow the jury to continue deliberating and reach a verdict. Then when that time comes, he'll dismiss the case. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos joins us with more. So, Danny, let's start with the basics. The burden of proof. It is on Palin's team to meet that standard in proving the New York Times defamed her. How high is that standard?
It's very hard. Normally, in negligence cases, the burden is a preponderance of the evidence. That really just means 51%. But when it comes to defamation cases, the standard rises to clear and convincing evidence. That's a higher burden for a plaintiff to meet. And then, in addition, she has to show constitutional malice because she is a public figure, the most public of figures in a category of public figures. And that means instead of negligence, she has to prove that the Times was essentially reckless. In fact, really more than reckless, that they pretty much knew that what they were publishing was false, or they basically put their fingers in their ears and said, la, 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 I don't want to hear the truth, before they published. And the judge in this case said the record just doesn't show that. It may show some sloppy work. And he said from the bench that he wasn't happy granting this motion, but that in his opinion, the fact that there was back and forth between editor and writer shows that he didn't believe that he was disregarding the truth.
So here's the question I think a lot of folks have. Why let the jury keep deliberating if the judge plans to dismiss this case?
It has very little to do with this trial. This trial is over. The only thing that happens now is Palin loses, and now she has a chance to lose some more. So she will not win the day. This is all about appeal and creating a more complete record. Yes, it's unusual for it to work out this way, but essentially now on appeal, if the appeals court decides Judge Rakoff just got it wrong, one of the options is they might just reinstate the verdict instead of sending it back down for a brand new trial. But in addition, allowing the jury to come back with a verdict does create a more complete record when this case inevitably goes up on appeal to the Second Circuit. And really, the judge is probably thinking ahead to when it goes to the Supreme Court.
And yeah, so what are Sarah Palin's options here moving forward now?
Appeal, appeal, appeal. She's got to appeal the case, and it's going to go up to the Second Circuit, and the court there will decide whether or not Judge Rakoff made a bad decision here. So this is, the day is over at trial. Maybe it'll come back for a trial years from now, months from now, but this case as it is today, Palin loses. Whether the jury comes back with a verdict in her favor or whether the jury comes back and says Palin loses, she loses today.
And what are the implications of a case like this when it comes to journalism and the future of journalism?
That's really what this is about. Journalists everywhere are watching this case because it's not often that even, especially the New York Times, it gets sued, but it doesn't lose. I don't think it's lost in 50 years, a case like this. And the reality is, what is the standard, generally speaking, for news organizations to be held liable, especially the Times, which no matter what you think of the Times, one way or another, they absolutely go through the most layers of review compared to a lot of websites and blogs and other things out there. They go through no review whatsoever. So journalists should be very concerned about this case and be watching it closely because it really does set the standard for reporting on public figures like Sarah Palin.
Danny Savalos, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it. There are new questions this morning about former President Trump's financial dealings amid ongoing civil and criminal investigations in New York. The Trump Organization's accounting firm, Mazars, says it is cutting ties with the company. In a letter, the accountants say that the organization's financial statements from June of 2011 to June of 2020 can no longer be viewed as reliable. It's these same documents that the Trump Organization used to obtain massive loans. Now, New York Attorney General Letitia James included that letter to the Trump Organization in court filings for her ongoing civil probe into Donald Trump's business practices. The former president claims the probe is illegitimate and the company has denied wrongdoing in response to the investigation. A spokesperson for the Trump Organization characterized this letter as actually good news for the company, saying in part it renders the investigations by the DA and AG moot. Czar says it will no longer work with the Trump Organization. Both the civil and a separate criminal investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney remain ongoing.
Now, more and more states are making changes to their mask and vaccine mandates. Washington, D.C. is rolling back its indoor mask mandate, and Philadelphia is considering dropping its vaccine requirement for indoor dining. These decisions come as cases and hospitalizations continue to decline. Joining us now is Dr. Bob Lahita. He's a professor at the Hackensack Meridian Medical School and the director of autoimmune and rheumatic diseases at St. Joseph Health, as well as the author of Immunity Strong. Dr. Lahita, always great to have you with us. So while cases and hospitalizations are down, which is great news, deaths are actually still up. Explain that there. Why is that? Why are deaths up if cases are down? And also, what do you think about rolling back mask mandates right now?
Well, the first thing I can say is that cases are dramatically down. Vaccinations do work. But remember, Savannah, there haven't been any miracle drugs. There hasn't been any reason to see this significant decline of infection. Last year, we were testing only the people who were very sick. This year, we are testing everybody, whether you have symptoms or don't have symptoms, so that the numbers are declining based on testing. But in the ICU, those who are very, very ill still succumb to the disease. And, you know, 80% of the ICU beds in the country are occupied, but the numbers of deaths are down to about 27%, and let's say in some states even 10%. So it's a dramatic decline in the number of severe cases in the ICU.
Now, doctor, I want to ask you about the potential of a second booster shot. So Sweden's public health agency is recommending that people 80 and over receive a second booster. So that essentially is a fourth overall shot. Can we expect a fourth shot to be coming soon for most Americans? And what do you make of that? Do you see people going and getting a fourth shot?
I don't see a fourth shot as being realistic. However, Sweden's got a great idea in that people over 80, the case fatality rate in that population is very, very high when they get the COVID infection. So I can understand them trying to give a second booster. However, I don't see it realistic here in this country as giving a second booster.
I actually have a viewer question related to this for you, doctor. This is from Van in Jacksonville asking, how long does the effect of the booster shot last? It's been about 6 months since I received a booster shot. Should I seek another vaccine shot to sustain my immunity? What do you say to that, doctor?
I say that the booster shot wanes after 4 months, and we still have cellular immunity. And indeed, those who have been infected previously have natural immunity in addition to having received the full vaccine and the booster. So immunity probably goes beyond 4 months. But as far as measuring neutralizing antibody and perhaps some forms of cellular immunity, I think it goes way beyond 4 months. So I don't really think you have to worry. But the actual booster shot lasts only 4 months.
All right. Great answer there, Dr. Bob Lahita. Thank you so much. I'm sure Van, who asked that question, thanks you as well. And if you have a question for one of our doctors, please do let us know. Email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com and let us know if you'd like to stay anonymous.
Let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Which means Bill Cairns joins us. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Speaking of winter, we got a pretty significant storm heading into the middle of the country, and with it, we're going to have a whole variety of issues. And today's not bad, but starting tomorrow and then into Thursday, it's really the high impact days, a lot of travel issues along with it. So the storm doesn't look like much now. It's a little bit of clouds and a little bit of blue over the Rockies. It won't be until this storm gets into the plains that it will start to cause significant problems. The first issue, severe weather. This storm will have the potential to even spawn some February tornadoes in Oklahoma and Texas. We're going to watch out. This isn't for today. This is Wednesday evening and Wednesday night from Dallas to Oklahoma City into areas of Arkansas. And this should last into Thursday morning as these storms will move from Little Rock to Memphis. They should weaken by the time they get to Atlanta and Nashville. But during the day Thursday, again, isolated tornadoes and wind damage possible, Alexandria to Jackson. And this has enough warm weather with it that we're actually going to have significant snow melt and along with it some heavy rain in areas of the Ohio Valley. So southern Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois under flash flood watches at this time. And the rainfall totals could be anywhere between 2 to 3 inches of rain. Along with the snow melt, temperatures in the 50s and 60s, that's problematic this time of year. And this will be a heavy rain event for areas of Kentucky and Nashville, even North Georgia and the mountains of North Carolina. But we don't expect the flooding problems like we do in areas of Ohio. So for today's forecast, it's one more cold, chilly morning in the Northeast, and then that warm up begins. Temperatures are very mild in the middle of the country. Watch out for those winds today in the plains. We could have some brush fires even forming. And if they do, they will spread rapidly in Oklahoma and Texas. And then for tomorrow, there's that warm up into D.C., New York, and Boston. And when you see that we're in the teens in the northern plains and 70s in Texas, that's usually a good indication we have a pretty big storm in the middle of the country. We'll talk more about the snow and ice forecast next hour.
Oh, that's something. The ice forecast. All right. Can't wait.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Coming up in Morning News Now, emergency north of the border.
Yeah, the historic action taken by Canada's Prime Minister after weeks of demonstrations, crippling traffic in the nation's capital and along the border to and from the U.S. after the break.
Canada's Prime Minister is invoking new emergency powers this morning. He's trying to break up those trucker protests that have paralyzed the capital of Ottawa and shut down some border crossings within the U.S.
And now these demonstrations are being tied to disinformation campaigns overseas. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has the latest.
The emergency powers invoked by Canada's Prime Minister will last 30 days and allow the government to prohibit public assembly and use specific property to break up these protests. So-called freedom convoys protesting COVID restrictions have been bubbling for weeks. But now police in Western Canada have arrested 11 people and seized guns, body armor, and a large quantity of ammunition at a border blockade. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked rarely used emergency powers.
These blockades are illegal, and if you're still participating, the time to go home is now.
Over the weekend, the Ambassador Bridge connecting Detroit and Windsor reopened after protesters had blocked it, clogging the supply chain for U.S. automakers. But similar demonstrations have started popping up around the world, from New Zealand to France to Israel. In the U.S., they're being embraced by some conservative politicians.
But I hope the truckers do come to America. I hope they clog up cities.
But disinformation is flourishing. Facebook officials tell NBC News that some of the groups that have promoted American trucker convoys are being run by fake accounts tied to content mills in Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Romania. Extremist researchers are also warning that many anti-vaccine and conspiracy-driven communities in the U.S. are quickly pivoting to promote disruptive convoys.
These groups are using these trucker convoys specifically to push their anti-vaccine messages. It sort of worked in Canada, and they're going to see if it can work in the United States.
U.S. federal authorities have been monitoring the possibility that a convoy could disrupt the Super Bowl. That did not happen. Now, online groups are discussing the possibility of another date for road closures across the U.S. March 5th. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Gabe.
Take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
Ali Arouzi is with us from Tehran. Hey, Ali.
Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, Joe. An overnight explosion in a village in the French Pyrenees that set a fire raging through a building has claimed the lives of at least 7 people, including 2 children, while injuring around 30 others. Authorities say the death toll is provisional and they expect it to go up. The explosion is believed to have occurred on the ground floor. Flames quickly engulfed the building and the 2 neighboring properties. Firefighters have searched 2 of the buildings, but said the third remained too dangerous to enter. Investigators say gas cylinders may have been the cause. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention designated half a dozen new places as very high risk for travel, including South Korea and French Polynesia. However, most of the 6 new additions to the very high risk level 4 category are off the beaten track, like Belarus, which is located in what is currently the world's hottest hotspot between Russia and Ukraine, or Azerbaijan on the Caspian Sea, which is an inland body of water. And finally, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has made a historic visit to Bahrain. It's the first time an Israeli leader has visited the Gulf state and underscores an initiative by Israel to normalize relations with its neighbors, in part to counter Iran. Priorities are shifting, which is changing the political landscape. Arab leaders seem to have more in common with Israel in their desire to contain Iran and appear less concerned about reaching a conclusion to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And those are your headlines, guys.
All right, Ali, thank you so much.
Thank you. And coming up, new research finds more teens feeling more alone than ever before.
After the break here on Morning News Now, we'll talk to an expert about a possible link between mental health and smartphone use, plus more in our weekly check-in. We all use emojis to add a bit of fun to our text conversations, but how about our web browsing? Well, the web browser Opera will now allow emoji-based web addresses. It's part of a new partnership with Yat. That's a company that sells emoji-only URLs. So let's explain this. These emoji strings are called Yats. They can be anywhere from 1 to 5 characters long and, of course, can now be sold as NFTs. A single Yat can sell for just a few dollars or up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The most expensive one, a single gold key, sold for $425,000 last year. Celebrities like Kesha and Lil Wayne have already invested in the whimsical websites. More are sure to follow. Good luck explaining that one to your parents. You can find it at, Emoji, Peacock, TV.
Yeah. Wow, that one,
It's not surprising, though, I guess. So
I guess, but also, so if it's only on Opera, you can't go to goldkey.com on Chrome.
Right. So more needs to be done, apparently.
Yeah.
Cool idea.
Including our learning
400,000
and understanding.
All right, time now for our weekly mental health check-in, where we talk through some of the biggest mental health headlines and trends and how they affect you.
Yeah, we also want to take this moment to pause, take a deep breath, and reflect on our emotional well-being. Let's bring in psychiatrist Dr. Sue Varma to help break down these latest headlines for us. Hi, Dr. Varma. Good morning. So researchers have found that feeling sad or stressed can make us less likely to remember to carry out everyday tasks. So it sounds like there is a real link here. What are ways to improve our memory or track some of these important tasks? How can we reduce stress to prevent this from happening in the first place as well?
So that's such a great question. So we recognize that chronic stress, right, not acute stress can be very mobilizing for a lot of people to get them motivated to get tasks done. But when we have poor coping skills, so I mean that if we're turning to food or alcohol or other outlets that are not helpful, this can worsen our mood and our memory and make it even harder to remember some of those tasks. We also have to remember that one of the hallmarks of chronic stress is avoidance and procrastination. So anything that you can do on a daily basis, whether it be movement, whether it be mindfulness, whether it be engaging in things that are pleasant, whether it means connecting with friends, I call them the 4 M's of mental health, can help not only reduce stress, but help stress in the everyday. And as a result, improve your memory, your mood, and your focus.
Those tips apply to so many things. All right,
Yeah,
I want to ask you
absolutely.
about an alarming study about teens and smartphones. Researchers found loneliness among 15 and 16-year-olds has tripled since 2000, from 9% of teens feeling isolated at school to nearly 33%. Now, while researchers can't concretely show smartphones are the cause of isolation, the study found a strong correlation. How can teens break those feelings of isolation? How can they reduce their time on their smartphones, too?
We have to remember that smartphones, unfortunately, now are replacing so much of the face-to-face interaction, and they've really become a norm. They've become a part of our lives, especially for younger people. So if you were to walk into a lunchroom in a school, and if they happen to allow smartphones, you'll see more kids looking down and sometimes than talking face-to-face. And what happens is that not only are we losing in-person interactions, when children are getting together, or teens are getting together, they're no longer engaging in conversation, and they're no longer handling conflict, right? So people are breaking up with each other, including friendships over the phone. No one's actually having the difficult confrontational conversations that actually contribute to emotional intelligence. So I think it's really important that teens, when they're face-to-face, actually talk to each other, right? Like, it's totally okay to reference your phone. The problem is that it leads to loneliness because a lot of kids are saying, I'm not part of that online community. I don't know what you're talking about. And then there's cyberbullying. So bringing it back to in-person and having real life interactions with people and hobbies and leadership and sports, all of that can help combat some of this loneliness.
It's also just so hard if you think back to growing up. The fact that you have to see things that you're not included in, you have to see pictures of friends hanging out, that type of thing. It's just so much to handle at such a young age. Doctor, we talk so much here on the show about mental health concerns. We dedicate a lot of time to that. So we also want to focus on some of the day-to-day logistics of finding the right therapist, something that might be a step in the right direction for a lot of people in this regard. What advice do you have for people looking for a therapist?
So I want to give major kudos to anybody who's doing this. And I would say, look at their online profiles. A lot of them include video of their background, of what their orientation is, of what kind of populations they work with, what their fees are, whether they take insurance, which type of insurance. One website that a lot of people really like that I know is psychologytoday.com, but there's so many of them. And I would say, ask them if they can schedule a free 10-minute brief consultation. Back in the good old days, doctors and therapists actually used to have the time to do that. Not so much anymore, so it might be a little bit hard. But knowing what you're getting into and recognizing that therapy takes time, it's a process, there's a relationship and a rapport that has to build, so give it a chance. But if after several sessions you find that the person isn't listening or paying attention or can't remember who you are, or you really don't feel seen or heard, it's also okay to break up with your therapist. So keep all of that possibilities in mind.
Absolutely. That is really, really good advice there. Dr. Sue Varma, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, sticker shock at the car lot, the warning to drivers in the market for a new ride, and what you can do to get a deal even with demand so high.
Plus, investing in diversity, a look at the changing landscape of health tech and how it's impacting the industry. Next on Morning News Now. If you've been shopping for a car lately, you know it's turned into something out of the Hunger Games. Forget about trying to find a good deal or negotiating. If you find a car at all, it's pretty much take it or leave it. NBC News senior national correspondent Carrie Sanders has the latest on this.
The cost of buying a car has been accelerating big time. These days, 8 out of 10 new car buyers pay more than sticker price. On average, $728 more. And in some cases, people are shelling out thousands more. Experts blame ongoing supply chain problems.
Market's a little crazy.
Still, there are a lot of buyers in the market for a new ride. Justin Sofer had his eye on a new Toyota RAV4. He signed a contract and even put down a deposit for the manufacturer's suggested retail price. But when it arrived from Japan, serious sticker shock. The dealer jacked the price up by $2,000.
I've probably owned about 5 or 6 cars, and I've never paid sticker price.
Sofer eventually got his Toyota at sticker, but he tells me he had to find a new dealer.
You complained to the Massachusetts State Attorney General, and what kind of result did you get?
They said that they would keep a record of it, but there wasn't anything they could do in my particular case, unfortunately.
But car manufacturers are not happy with price gouging. GM reportedly telling its dealers that it will be forced to take action if it learns of any unethical sales practices. Ford says, quote, "We are actively looking at how to address those behaviors," even warning dealers who sell vehicles above MSRP they may not get the highly anticipated electric F-150 Lightning.
I've never seen anything like this in 25 years that I've been in the industry.
Arnaldo Baumann sold more than 25,000 Chevrolets last year, more than any Chevy dealer in the nation. Except for Corvettes, he says he prices all vehicles at least $2,000 below MSRP. Not bad for a guy who came to the U.S. from Cuba in 1994 and began by selling fish on the side of the road.
What, from your personal experience, has established why you are not charging excessive amounts?
When I got here, I've always tried to go in the opposite direction than the rest. If you're gonna charge $10,000 over MSRP, you're gonna charge $2,000, $3,000 under MSRP.
Baumann says he makes less money per sale, but wins in volume. Even more confusing, the used car market. Prices up a staggering 40.5% in the past year. A significant number of used cars bought in 2021 now actually selling for more than when they were new.
1 in 10 customers got more money for a trade-in than with the initial purchase price. And that is remarkable.
One reason that the used car market is in such a quandary right now is because when the pandemic hit, rental cars that would be dumped onto the used car market, that didn't happen because the car companies weren't dumping those cars, meaning that there has been a supply and demand in the used car market, and that continues right now, Savannah.
Ooh, all right, Carrie Sanders, I've been looking for a car myself, so I could say this is all true, and it's a disaster right now. Thank you so much.
Time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Christina Partsinevelos joins us today. Hey, Christina, good morning.
Good morning. Let's start with Intel striking a deal today to buy Israel-based chipmaker Tower Semiconductors for more than $5 billion. The move boasts Intel's plan to produce more chips for other companies. Tower actually makes semiconductors and circuits that are used in almost everything from cars and consumer electronics to medical and industrial equipment. It has manufacturing plants in Israel, California, Texas, and Japan. Last month, keep in mind, Intel announced plans to invest at least $20 billion in new chip facilities in Ohio. And you can see it's already starting to do so. Snapchat is rolling out a new way for content creators to make some money. You'll soon start seeing mid-roll ads in public stories from Snap stars or people with verified accounts, you know, with a large number of followers. Snap will share ad revenue with its creators for the first time ever as well, and it's testing these mid-roll ads with a select group of stars and then plans to expand them sometime later this year. And sticking on theme, let's talk about Instagram. Instagram is launching a new feature called Private Story Likes. So it lets you like someone's Instagram story, think like a celebrity or somebody on CNBC, without having to send them a direct message. Previously, any response you sent about a story actually showed up in their DMs. So the new feature will let you show your appreciation without clogging the user's inbox. Stories won't have like counts either. And Instagram, remember, tested hiding like counts in the main feed before deciding to leave them on by default. So a few changes with Snapchat as well as Instagram, guys.
All right.
Thank you,
for
Christina.
that. Thank you.
Thank you.
This morning, we have the story of one venture firm providing seed money and a chance for success to black entrepreneurs in the field of health tech. CNBC reporter Bertha Coombs joins us now with more on that. Hey, Bertha, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Joe. You know, nearly 1 in 3 black businesses is in the healthcare and social assistance field. But those that are in health tech really need next level financing, and trying to get that is really tough. So there are some firms now trying to make it more intentional so that they can get in the game. Daryl Porter knew his idea was good, a platform to help researchers develop gene cell therapies.
That was very appealing to a lot of investors.
His timing was bad. He launched March 2020, just before everything shut down. But when things reopened, he discovered venture capital funding was about more than buying into an idea.
They're really making a bet on you as the entrepreneur, and therefore it's a profoundly personal decision. And, you know, being different or a situation where the investor may not see themselves in you or may not find a way to connect, that makes it harder to find capital.
In 2020, 78% of venture capital investment partners were white, 15% Asian, and just 3% black, according to a VC Human Capital survey.
I just got a couple of bills I need to approve, I guess. Yeah.
Marcus Whitney was a partner at venture firm Jumpstart Health in 2020. After the George Floyd protests, he says things shifted.
I tapped into an awareness that there was a willingness to do something that I'd never really felt at any point in my life.
He seized on that to help raise a fund to invest exclusively in black health firms.
The number one question was, hey, this sounds great, I want to be a part of it, but are there actually enough deals out there?
One of his first deals was seed funding for CellEvolve.
Had Marcus, as well as one of our other colleagues from Hibiscus Bio, not taken the bet on CellEvolve and me personally, I mean, we never might have gotten the company off the ground.
This month, Whitney's Jumpstart Nova launched a $55 million fund to back black health tech startups with investors including Eli Lilly, HCA Healthcare, and Bank of America.
We think we can catalyze more capital going to these founders beyond what we can do from an investment perspective.
Yeah, they are expecting to fund some 20 startups. So they've already identified about 150. And what they're hoping is that they can help shed light and connect them to other investors to really help keep this process going.
Very cool. Bertha, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome to see. Coming up, a new push to preserve the past with an eye toward the future.
Up next, more on the efforts to restore a small town once known as Black Eden. This is Morning News Now. A Michigan couple is working to restore an important part of black history in this country.
Yeah, as NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald explains, preserving the past is vital to its future.
Tucked away in the forest of northern Michigan is a place known as Black Eden.
This was our place of refuge and relaxation.
This is Idlewild, a summer resort town built in the 1920s. It was one of the few places where black people could own property. Blair Evans and Susan Matus live here year-round.
A lot of people appreciated coming to Idlewild in one sense because you escape from the oppression of being black, but in another sense because you could be authentically black.
Here, they could swim, ride horses, and be entertained. It was a reprieve from segregation and the horrors that came with being black in America. But when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed, things changed.
Integration did a lot to damage Idlewild. Black people deserted Idlewild because then other places opened up and we could go any place.
Marilyn Atkins built this cottage with her dad when she was 9 years old.
And here's my dad.
They came every summer, passing the tradition to her daughter and grandson.
Idlewild is a tremendous source of pride, and it anchors us in our history and culture.
A culture that's shifted. Idlewild isn't what it once was. Less people live and vacation here. But now,
This one is our sweet.
a renewed effort to bring it back, partially led by Blair and Susan, who are on a mission to inspire black families to buy property and plant roots.
So some of the younger folks are thinking about, well, what would it mean to reinvent that for the next 3 generations?
Hey, Danny! The couple hosting year-round events to attract tourists. Even some students pitching in, helping to restore this nightclub. Idlewild was a safe place for some of the biggest names in entertainment to perform, like Louis Armstrong to Sammy Davis Jr., Della Reese, and the Four Tops.
Makes me feel pretty accomplished because of all the historical figures that have stepped foot in this very place right now.
A new generation remembering the resilience of the past and inspired to build towards the future.
We recognize that our ancestors, they laid the ground for us, and now it's time for us to take the baton to help carry this on.
Megan Fitzgerald, NBC News, Idlewild, Michigan.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.